What's up, guys? Marco here with Dynasty Nerds, bringing you 4 rebuilding wide receiver trade targets. All right, so my first wide receiver that I think you need to be trading for right now if you're rebuilding is Brandon Aiyuk, wide receiver for the San Francisco 49ers. Now, when you look at him right now, he's a little bit unappealing because, he's fighting with Debo for targets. Trey Lance is probably stepping into the role here, so you could see a reduction in overall passing team volume. But when you look at a little bit deeper, you look at his situation, the circumstance, and you know that you are a team who isn't trying to win right now, you're rebuilding for the future, Brandon Aiyuk could be the wide receiver 1 for the 49ers as soon as 2023. He ended last season with 13.1 fantasy points per game over the last 7-8 games. Which would have been over 220 fantasy points over the course of the entire season, and that was while competing with Debo Samuel, 4 targets, George Kittle, 4 targets. He is someone who, if Debo leaves after the season, which is looking really likely after, he demanded a trade, it didn't really happen. He was very unhappy with his usage and his role. Brandon Aiyuk could fit nicely as soon as next year as the wide receiver 1 for this team. There's a couple trades I saw Brandon Aiyuk going for, or receiving Brandon Aiyuk for, that I think you can make right now and never look back. The first one is Brandon Cooks. Brandon Cooks is a phenomenal player. He is someone who, in 2022, I'm buying. If you watched my Win Now wide receiver trade target video, Brandon Cooks was on that list. But if you can swap him right now as a rebuilding team for Brandon Aiyuk, I think you're getting immense upside. I think you're getting a long shelf life, a long career life in Brandon Aiyuk. And you're losing a guy who, while he could help you now, that doesn't help your team right now. So I'm making that deal. Another deal I saw is Miles Sanders. Miles Sanders is on the downward trajectory. Sure, this season he might have some nice moments, but ultimately he never really lived up to expectations. Miles Sanders is an average running back so far when it comes to fantasy production. And if you can go ahead and move him right now for Brandon Aiyuk, that's a home run. I'm doing that 10 out of 10 times. The last 2 trades are a little bit interesting. Allen Lazard and Michael Thomas for Brandon Aiyuk. I saw that in a league happen recently, and it's an interesting one because I think Allen Lazard could have wide receiver 3 with upside value in this season. But again, you're building for the future. Allen Lazard might be a guy who sticks around for a while with these Packers, but ultimately, he's not a wide receiver 1 for fantasy. He's not a wide receiver 2 for fantasy. And if you're still believing in Michael Thomas, let me just let you know, it's been long enough. It's time to move on from Michael Thomas. Brandon Aiyuk is going to set your team up for a long-term success with Debo or without Debo. And so I'm buying him right now for those 2. And then the final deal I saw, which is pretty interesting, I know a lot of people on this channel seem to really, really like 2023 seconds. But if you have 2 2023 seconds, and they're one early and one mid, even, one 202 and one 208, I'm fine moving those picks for Brandon Aiyuk, because here's the reality. As nice as it might be to have 2023 picks, and that's an asset that's going to gain value, I would rather have the player who we've seen do it on the field in Brandon Aiyuk. Those picks, while they might be nice in their intrinsic value and what your league thinks of, 2023 seconds, if I'm able to swap 2 2023 seconds for a proven young wide receiver who could be the wide receiver 1 for a very prolific offense, I am doing it 10 out of 10 times. I'm buying Brandon Aiyuk right now. He's one of my favorite wide receiver buys right now because he is going way under value. If he even approaches what he did at the last half of last season, this season, even with Debo, he's going to be an enormous riser in ADP for startups. He's going to be an enormous riser in value in trades. And so I'm acquiring him right now because he is going to see the biggest bump in value, not those 2023 seconds. All right, the next guy I think you have to talk about here because he's not going to be on the field this year. So if a contender has Calvin Ridley on his team, I am buying. Right now, I've seen Calvin Ridley go for a couple of interesting things. But before we do that, let's talk about what he's done on the field. Obviously, 2 years ago, he was the breakout, the phenom, and he's a little bit older. I mean, by the time he plays, he'll be 28, I believe. And so that's a little bit of a knock. But a 28-year-old Calvin Ridley with fresh legs, you're assuming. I think he's going to still be a tremendous value for the next couple of seasons. And when you're looking at a rebuilding team, typically you're not like, I want to rebuild for 5 years from now. You want to rebuild for 1 to 2, maybe at the most 3 years away. So if you're adding Calvin Ridley right now, you're hoping that you get him back to what we were seeing in last year before he took time away from the game, or the year prior. And I think you can get that from Calvin Ridley. Even last year, before he had to kind of step away from football for a little bit, he was averaging 14.22 fantasy points per game, which over a 17-game season would have been a top 15 wide receiver. And right now you can get him for a really nice price. The first one I'm just going to throw out there and rip off the Band-Aid because it's one that might get some pushback. If you can trade Cam Akers right now for Calvin Ridley and a 2023 first, I'm doing that every single time. Cam Akers is a guy who we saw flashes, but we haven't seen him be a prolific NFL running back, especially for fantasy production. Then add on the Achilles injury. Sure, he came back and, he wasn't very good. When he came back and played poorly, that's not really the big knock for me. The long-term outlook for running backs coming off of an Achilles injury is just rough, and it's brutal, and it's not a ride I want to take, especially for a position like the running back that has such a short-term value when you look at your dynasty rosters. So I'm selling Cam Akers for Calvin a 2023 first, Calvin a pair of 2023 seconds, Calvin a pair of 2024 seconds is even a little bit interesting. And I think right now you can do that because Cam Akers is appearing to be healthy. He's getting all of the hype right now, and I think you can move him. The next one is Jerry Jeudy. Jerry Jeudy is in a real make or break season when you look at this offense for the Broncos. He's been pretty uninspiring. He's had little flashes here and there. Sure, he hasn't had the quarterback. Yes, they added Russell Wilson. But ultimately, Jerry Jeudy, outside of his route running, hasn't done a lot. He's had a lot of drops, and while drops aren't an indicator of fantasy, what you're going to be able to do fantasy production-wise, we see that in Deontay Johnson, Stephon Diggs, things like that. But Jerry Jeudy is a guy who we just haven't seen much from, and if you can turn him into a potential top 15 wide receiver for the next 2 to 3 seasons in Calvin Ridley, I am doing that right now. And if you're a rebuilding team, it doesn't really matter what Jerry Jeudy does for the season. So even if he does have a nice season, he's still competing with so many other options on that offense for targets. I'm selling him. The last one that I thought was pretty interesting was Hunter Renfrow and a 2023 second. Now, Hunter Renfrow has seen a little bit of a roller coaster of value since they added Devontae Adams and what this team is going to do as a whole with the new coaching regime. But if you can trade Hunter Renfrow in a 2023 second for a guy like Calvin Ridley and just make the pitch of Calvin Ridley's not helping your team right now, because odds are Hunter Renfrow is probably on a team who might be contending. Calvin Ridley's on a team that might be contending. I'm okay selling Hunter Renfrow, who's probably a wide receiver 3 at the best, and a 2023 second for a guy, like I said before, who could be a top 15 wide receiver. All right, we got a couple more. I'm going to package these two together, George Pickens and John Mechie. These guys were going at the end of the first round, early second round of rookie drafts, maybe even middle of the second round if you're talking about John Mechie. And I think they're both slotted to get tons of opportunity at the end of 2022 at the very earliest, and then into 2023 they should see enormous opportunity. John Mechie, he's coming back from a very serious injury out of Bama, so we don't know really when we're going to see John Mechie be fully healthy. It might not be for most, if not all of 2022, even if he does get on the field. So his buy window is much larger, I think, but when you get to 2023, he could be the guy who leads this team in targets or comes very close, depending on what happens with Brandon Cooks and if they decide to trade him or move on from him in some capacity. At the very least, he'll be the wide receiver 2 on a team that I think is making all the right moves. If you know any of my content in the past, whether it be on Twitter, Dynasty Nerds, anywhere else, you know that I think Davis Mills is the real deal. I think he's better than most of the quarterbacks, if not all of the quarterbacks who just came out of this last year's draft. So John Mechie is going to be a really nice fit for this offense. He's a guy I really believe in. Now, George Pickens, his value might start increasing sooner and sooner and sooner. Obviously, Chase Claypool just came out. He thinks he's the top 3 wide receiver in the league. The reality is he's not. He might not even be a top 3 pass catcher on his team. I think by the end of the season, George Pickens will have established himself as the wide receiver 2 for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, as long as he can stay out of trouble off the field, then I'm still all in on George Pickens. And Deontay Johnson is maybe going to leave the Steelers. We don't know after the season. He's going to be a free agent. So if he stays, George Pickens, I think, is the wide receiver 2 for this team. If he goes, I think George Pickens is the wide receiver 1 for this team. Just process of elimination, So I think George Pickens is one of those guys who, because of his off the field issues, because of some of his interview stuff, he fell in the NFL draft. But he is one of the most athletic, talented wide receivers that came out of this class. He was my overall wide receiver 2 in this class. I think he is very, very talented, and he landed on a team that I think can manage the wide receiver position really well, can develop the wide receiver position very well in the Steelers. And ultimately, I think George Pickens is the number 1 rookie wide receiver trade target that I'm getting right now, because he's not going typically at a premium. Like I said, he's going the end of the first round, early second round of most rookie drafts. All right, the last guy, it'll be fairly quick, Devonta Smith. He is probably for 2022 going to be a real letdown, because Jalen Hurts, whether you believe in him or not, I don't really believe in Jalen Hurts overall as an NFL passer. Obviously for fantasy, he'll be great, but as an NFL passer, I don't think Jalen Hurts has it. I don't think he can really pass the ball very well. And even the moments when he can, I think A.J. Brown, Dallas Goedert, maybe one of the running backs, Kenny Gainwell, Miles Sanders, one of them might see a lot more opportunity than a Devonta Smith. Devonta Smith is an insanely talented player. So here's what has to happen for the Eagles. Either Jalen Hurts takes an enormous step, or they decide it's time to move on from Jalen Hurts and they draft a young top option at the quarterback position coming out in 2023. Either way, Devonta Smith will see a boost from that, and I don't think we're going to see the big boost in value in 2022. I think we're probably going to see it in the offseason heading into 2023 or in 2023. So Devonta Smith is a huge buy opportunity right now. He's shown that everything he was good at in college, he can do at the NFL level. He can separate, he can run routes, he's got decent hands. And so I think ultimately what you get in a guy like Devonta Smith is someone who isn't going to help you win right now, but again, you're rebuilding. You don't need that. All right, here's some trades that I saw Devonta Smith going for that I am all in on if you can make it happen. All right, Gabe Davis and a 2024 second. I'm doing that 10 out of 10 times. Gabe Davis is probably going slightly above his ceiling right now. Sure, he's the wide receiver 2 on the outside for the Bills, but historically, when you look at Josh Allen and this Bills offense, the slot wide receiver actually is more productive than the wide receiver 2. Gabe Davis isn't going to play in the slot. It's going to be Jamison Crowder, Khalil Shakir. So Gabe Davis is going to be a good player. He's going to be a fine player for fantasy. He is not going to probably be a consistent wide receiver 2. He might have those boom weeks where he ends up as a wide receiver 1 week, as he ends up as a wide receiver 2 a couple weeks. Is he consistently going to be there? No. Sell on the Gabe Davis hype right now. I've talked about that before. And if you can turn him and a 2024 second into a true elite wide receiver that I think Devonta Smith is, I'm doing that 100% of the time. All right, 2022, 111 or lower. I've talked about this before in some other videos, but really 109 and lower, 108, depending on where you're at or what your draft is falling like. I think 111 or lower are really just shots in the dark. They're the Christian Watsons of the world who have immense upside, but there's a lot of question marks. And if I can trade one of those picks or later for a guy who I think as a talent, NFL-wise, Devonta Smith can do it, and could potentially see a better option at quarterback soon or a development of his current quarterback, he is in an offense that's going to probably get him the ball in 2023 and beyond quite a bit. And so I'm trading one of those shot in the dark, late first, early seconds for Devonta Smith every single time. I think that's an enormous value for a rebuilding team, more value even than a Christian Watson. All right, the last one I saw was Christian Kirk and a 2023 second. Now, I know a lot of people don't like moving 2023 seconds, but if you can move him and a average wide receiver for a potential alpha wide receiver in Devonta Smith, even when he's competing with A.J. Brown, I think that's a win for the long term for your team. Devonta Smith is still a young premier talent, and he's shown he can do it even in just one season in the NFL, even in a low passing attack, low volume passing attack, even with a questionable quarterback. And I think that's what you need to see. And Christian Kirk has shown that he's solid, but he's probably not much more than that. And he's done it with a very similar style quarterback who's much better than Jalen Hurts and Kyler Murray. So I think Devonta Smith is a buy for any of those deals. Let me know your thoughts below. Hit me up on Twitter at Marco_14P. DMs, tweet at me, whatever. I'll get back to any questions you might have. Drop comments below. I'll follow up with the YouTube videos as well. And I got more content coming soon, so be on the lookout for that. Subscribe to the Nerd Herd. Get the Dynasty GM tool. Use the link below to get a little discount, or you can sign up with promo code 14P. Thanks for hanging out. We'll see you next time. Peace.